Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today in our first Intern Talk for 2022. I am your host, Christian Gatahan, and I proudly welcome you all to this Intern Talk, the culminating activity and final presentation of these four student interns whom I mentored for 7 weeks as they do their research, which they will be presenting today. The internship program of the Intramuros Administration is handled under the Center for Intramuros Studies. The program is a research-oriented learning opportunity for interns to work directly with the administration in its work in directing the orderly development and restoration of the walled city. As such, the administration is investing in getting students and emerging professionals exposed to Intramuros Studies, Manila Studies, and heritage management. The administration's internship program challenges interns to apply and hone their current research skills in research and development. And with that, let us go over the program flow for this activity. We have started already with the introduction part, and we will next have the first presentation by Eunice Maningas and Pat Soriso, entitled Street and Trade, a Look on Culture and City Formation of Intramuros. This will be followed by a discussion with our invited panelists, and then we will open the discussion for questions from the audience. The same flow will happen with Light Within Darkness, Dark Tourism in Intramuros, a paper by Bartolome and Rojo. Then at 11:50, we will conclude this activity just in time for lunch. So to cap the introduction part, let us go over the house rules. For Zoom attendees, you may raise your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of our screen, while for those viewing us via Facebook Live, you may raise your questions in the comment section. If you wish to remain anonymous, please let us know, or you may opt to change your display name. Also, only those who have successfully registered and viewed on Zoom will be eligible to get a certificate. A feedback form will be emailed to you after the session, and the certificate will be sent within a week. Lastly, Please note that this webinar is recorded and the recording shall be made permanently available in IA social media channels. So without further ado, let us proceed. Our first presentation is entitled Street and Trade, a look on culture and city formation of Intramuros, which aims to describe the salient urban elements of Intramuros and construct a connection between the historical trade activities and its impact as reflected on the culture of the city. For this paper, we will have Sophia Eunice Maningas, an incoming senior student of BA Social Science, major in Area Studies at the University of the Philippines, Manila. She has participated in many studies that pertain to student behavior since she was in senior high school. Her research interests include anything under the cultural history and economic history of the Philippines. And we also have Patricia Soriso, also an incoming senior of BA Social Science, major in Area Studies at the UP Manila. She is an active member of the Organization of Area Studies Majors, and her research interests include the political and cultural history of the Philippines and Southeast Asia, urban community development, and post-colonial women's studies. So without further ado, I'm giving the floor to Eunice and Pat.
Thank you very much, Sir Christian, for the introduction. So allow me to share first my screen before we proceed. Kita na po ba? Yan po. Okay na po.
Loading. Good.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone, to our audience, panel members, Sir Espino and Ma'am Lagasca, to our co-researchers and interns. I would like to welcome you all to Intern Talks webinar. So our presentation for today will be about the research we made under the Center for Intramuros Studies entitled Street and Trade, a look on the culture and city formation of Intramuros. So as the title suggests, we will be looking at the connection between the historical trade activities and its impact on the culture and formation of the city. To give a short background on how we came up with the study, we were actually supposed to look into the subculture of informal settlers within the lanes and neighborhoods of Intramuros, Manila. So, however, given the limitations on data gathering procedures, we opted instead to study the crucial role of trade in the culture and city formation of Intramuros. Additionally, using MacG's model of phases of development, this study aimed to describe the salient urban elements of Intramuros. So more of these details later. So at this point, it is important to note that when we mention city formation of Intramuros, we mean not only the physical aspects of the walled city, but also how trade has helped in building several features of Intramuros that we know of today. So we started off our paper by describing how the walled city of Intramuros is a vestige or remnant of the Spanish regime's 300-year colonization in the Philippines. It is now known as a famous tourist spot within metropolitan Manila. The walled city remains a relevant setting of history and topic of inquiry for scholars, researchers, and even among those outside the realm of academics. So based on our internship or orientation prior to the internship, Intramuros is a witness to a manifold of cultural contact and economic trade from foreign powers. Therefore, the city encapsulates the influence of the Spanish colonial power despite its restoration and incorporation of Filipino identity. So before the dawn of colonization, the foundation of the city of Manila dates back to the old settlement of Raja Sulaiman. Even then, there was a thriving community that has been in connection with merchants from other civilizations outside of the country. So when the Spaniards arrived, the leader of the Spanish expedition, which was Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, saw Manila's crucial position as a commerce hub and military outpost. From then, they constructed Manila as a key entrepot for commerce across the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea with the empires of East Asia. And over the years, Intramuros became the center of politics, economics, and social-cultural aspects of the colonial Filipinos. Therefore, it is important to highlight that apart from its political and religious influence, Intramuros also became a global city and a hub for merchants and galleon traders. Now, I will hand over the presentation to Ms. Patricia Soriso to discuss over the information pertaining to our research.
Good day, everyone. And to continue, our study contributes to the limited literature discussing the connection of trading history in Intramuros to its existing culture. The results of this research endeavor deepen the contextual information on Southeast Asian traditional streets by bringing forth the data on Intramuros and their urban elements, which is a subject of Southeast Asian regional study that demands further investigation. Our specific objectives for this research are includes to construct a connection between the historical trade activities in Intramuros and its impact on the formation of the city, to discuss the salient urban elements of Intramuros, and to describe the significant aspects of existing Spanish culture in Intramuros through case studies in other academic journals. The significance of this research focuses on its contribution to the culturally diverse Southeast Asian regional studies. As a background, the transition of China from being a rural to an urban country took the spotlight in urban studies during the mid 1990s and was then followed by the acceleration of urbanism in South Asia. A paper by Go and Bonnell asserted that Southeast Asia was left far flung. The region of Southeast Asia, as we all know, has been playing an integral role as a potent area of international trade for centuries, and Intramuros, being a port and a formal colonial city, has become a melting pot of cultures and a space that witnessed the interplay of trading and street activities through time. Additionally, the outcome of this research will exhibit an understanding of the significance of Intramuros as a port city and the role of trade in its culture and city formation. In a study by Can and Idid in 2016, they utilized McGee's phasing of how Southeast Asian cities were urbanized through time. The phase began during the 3rd century BC when McGee described three patterns of cities. The first are sacred cities which emerged from the interior part of the country, and second are the administrative cities which are viewed as imperial city that holds the political power and the area where sacred structures are found. And then the third are the coastal cities, which were mostly developed by traders and merchants and functions as the capitals. And in the second phase was referred as the colonial urbanization, which began during the early 16th century when the Portuguese and Europeans began to engage in trade policies with China and India. It is the period where large-scale markets and trading systems were exposed to more countries to propagate a globalized scale of business. The third and fourth phases center on the periods of independence in the mid-20th century and the advent of modern era. So according to this phase model, the urban development of Southeast Asia was formed during the second phase, centering on coastal cities which functioned as a space for trade activities. McGee also asserts that the political and economic aspects of Southeast Asian countries are significantly influenced by both large and small port cities in the region such as Bangkok, Manila, Jakarta, and Kuala Lumpur. A study by Can and Idid highlights the following elements which will also be utilized for this research, such as the location, royal institutions, religious center, indigenous settlements, commercial districts, and street systems. Through this framework, the study will subject the 16th century Manila onwards as one of the port cities to analyze and highlight the significance of its historic role in the culture and activities of 21st century Intramuros.
So moving on to the methodology, our research utilized a qualitative case study to explain the relationship drawn between the historical commercial activities that took place in Intramuros and the influence such activities had on the formation and culture of the city. Beginning our research, a document analysis approach was used when we gathered the necessary information for this paper. So Ms. Soriso and I analyzed both primary and secondary resources published and available online to meet the objectives of the paper. After doing so, a careful analysis was done to draw conclusions from the body of related literature. So now we go to the bulk of paper, which is the second chapter, or the results and discussion. The first part is about Intramuros as a city of trade network and space of exchange. Here we are going to discuss the history of trade in Intramuros and its role in the city formation of Intramuros. So we started off by explaining how, as one of the first globalized cities in the world, Intramuros served as a connection between powerful empires in America and Europe. The galleon trade, also known as the Manila-Acapulco trade, sailed along the Pacific Ocean between Manila and Acapulco in Mexico for more than 250 years, which makes it the longest running shipping line during its time. The galleon trade served as one of the world's most important conduits in a growing global network of trade and exchange. As such, port cities like Intramuros in the early modern world were known as zones of contact. Now, most of us were taught that the galleon trade was the catalyst that opened up the Philippines to the world. However, looking at the economic history of the Philippines, it would tell us that the more accurate term would be the reopening, since during the pre-colonial times, there was evidence that the natives were already in trade and contact with other civilizations. Going back, despite the fact that Manila was reveling in the heyday of the galleon trade, the early years of Spanish administration in the Philippines declared no impositions of taxes or duties on international commerce during the first year of trade. However, when Governor Gomez Perez Dasmariñas assumed his position, he levied a 2% tax on the galleon trade in order to raise money that will cover the cost associated with building and fortification of the walls of Intramuros. So there were, of course, other sources of funding such as monopoly on playing cards, penalties for excessive card play, and the imposition of severe taxes on Chinese imports. But in this paper, of course, we highlight the imposition of taxes on trade since it contributed to the total amount that was used to build the walls of Intramuros. And on the video that we watched, it was a presentation by Dr. Jose Victor Torres titled Building a City, Intramuros and the Galleon Trade. He mentioned that Intramuros was practically built by the galleon trade, and the galleon trade made Manila wealthy, and wealth of the trade was the reason why the Intramuros walls were built. Additionally, we came across the article of Jamie Laya explaining how from the years 1565 to 1815, residents of Intramuros lived a good life due to the affluence of trade. This was supported by the study of Reyes entitled Flaunting It, How the Galleon Trade Made Manila. So here, it was noted that in the course of the first 3 months of the year, from March to June, residents and merchants in Manila participated in the frenzy of commercial activities. So these two, the first one would be building the walls due to trade taxes, as well as the affluent lifestyle of Intramuros residents, were the first evidence that connects trade to the formation of the walled city. Here, as mentioned earlier, Intramuros became the center of politics, economics, and social-cultural aspects of the colonial Filipinos. And if we view Intramuros in this light, the Manila-Acapulco trade had a significant impact not only on the incorporation of the Philippines into the realm of the Spanish Empire, but also on the establishment of the international economic system as a whole. So this is why scholars like Arturo Giraldes and Peter Gordon state how it was the galleon trade that actually led to the birth of globalization. Specifically, Giraldes mentioned in his book that the beginning of the Pacific international commerce may be traced back to 15 or as early as 1571 when the city of Manila was established. So the picture on the left is a depiction of the galleon trade, which is a display in the Ayala Museum. So coming from the modest Muslim settlement during the pre-Hispanic colonization to becoming one of Southeast Asia's largest and richest trading hub, Intramuros gave way for more interaction between people of great diversity. The galleon trade brought both permanent residents and wandering merchants to the colonial capital, which led to the boom in the population of residents, peddlers, hustlers, dealers, merchants, and seafarers. So from here, we can conclude that the galleon trade has helped in again making Intramuros, since the rise in the population led to the city to become a cosmopolitan metropolis, which served as a gathering place for people from all walks of life that is still seen today. So moving forward, as a result of the increasing volume of commerce, the ports of Manila had to be widened between the years 1881 and 1888, which is actually an evidence of the city's expanding significance at that time. Despite not completing the project due to legal procedures, the ports of Manila had reached a stage of development where it still served as a means of exporting goods from Luzon and ultimately played a crucial role in regional commerce. So connecting all of these, the present Intramuros continues to be a city of trade, network, and space of exchange. Flocked with street vendors and merchants of various goods, the business industry is very much alive and flourishing, even with the unchanging facade of Intramuros. Intramuros is a thriving metropolis on a historic site with a throng of people and small businesses. And according to Almendral, which is the main author whom we based our paper on regarding the present trade in Intramuros, small businesses, such as the ones you would see on the left side of the screen, small businesses are the essence and backbone of the Philippine street life, whether that would be in Intramuros or anywhere else in the country. The mere existence of the samahan ng nagkakaisang manininda sa Intramuros, which is the Food Vendors Association, is proof that the trade continues to shape the city and its activities.
To move forward in providing the data needed to identify the urban elements of Intramuros, spatial surveys, case studies, and secondary historical sources focusing on colonial history and streets of Intramuros and Manila were gathered. For this section, we formulated a comprehensive image of the 16th century layout of the port city and its street features. The urban components such as the port city's location, the existence of royal institution, religious centers, indigenous settlements, commercial districts, and its street system are cited as some of the shared elements among Southeast Asian urban port cities, all of which are utilized as a basis of situating Intramuros, Manila among its neighboring port cities. First among the elements is the city's location. A distinct but shared characteristic of Southeast Asian port cities is their nearness to a specific waterway, particularly a river. It has been cited as a paramount component of a developing settlement for it makes trade, transportation, and communication with other areas more convenient. Intramuros is situated at the mouth of the Pasig River, which flows west and connects to the Manila Bay. A case study by Mateo Babiano and Ieda discussed that dispatching produce of the city to other provinces is done through the Pasig River, and apart from facilitating trade, the location of the city near rivers or streams fosters socioeconomic and cultural progress as well. The second urban element discussed is the indigenous settlements in Intramuros. The indigenous settlements during the 16th century were not within the walled city but outside of it. Prior to the arrival of the Spaniards, the native communities in the country were settled in river villages, also known as the barangay. Since most of the trade routes in the Philippines are through waterways, the indigenous villages gravitate towards the coastal area. And one of the several impacts of Spanish colonization in the country was the figurative and physical segregation of the natives and the Spaniards. They created a physical divide by building a wall and called the city within Intramuros. And together with the Chinese communities, the indigenous settlements were designated in the suburbs near the plazas. Comparing the cited urban pattern of Kalin did in their study, for this specific element, Intramuros was different from other Southeast Asian port cities such as in Bangkok, Hanoi, and Malacca in Malaysia, which have indigenous settlements situated within their city. However, a study by Mateo Babiano cites a certain similarity in the pattern of segregation in the city of Bandung in Indonesia. In addition, the agenda of segregation elicits a significant impact on the city formation of the entire colony and in Intramuros. Its strategic location for defense and established trade makes the city the ideal candidate to be the capital of the Spanish colony in the Philippines. And the third pattern of urbanization present in the port city of Intramuros is its elaborate street system. In the literature of Torres, he cited that it has not been until the third decade of the 16th century that Spaniards began to implement the grid urban pattern in their new towns. Additionally, Verdejo et al. Even argued that Manila could be a representative model of the 16th century Spanish colonial city. In accordance with the past decree of King Philip II, the concept of quadricula, which is the structure of a community where an open plaza serves as its core, with main streets following a grid pattern from the four sides of the plaza, was applied to the port city. The street network of Intramuros has a formal layout that is composed of arranged streets and squares that are straight and level. The largest square is allotted to the Plaza Mayor, the Central Plaza, which is located on the left facing the Cathedral Church and municipal structures. And then another square is assigned to Plaza de Armas, which is devoted to the artilleries, which faces the fort. Verdejo et al. In their paper reported that the street system of Intramuros did not receive major alterations through the centuries. However, they cited certain exemptions, such as the adjacent urban structure of the Perian Market, the city blocks near Fort Santiago, and the adjacent blocks of the demolished Pasig River walls. Moving forward, the Spaniards' approach to imperialism has been described to be different from other Western colonizers, such as the Portuguese, Dutch, and British, who restricted their subjugation within the bounds of trade. The Spaniards, on the other hand, seized the territorial, economic, cultural, and even religious aspects of the country. Catholicism was maximized as a tool of the Spaniards for colonization by situating churches within the most prime area or lot in the main plaza. The presence of religious centers such as the churches was shared by port cities in Southeast Asia, and Intramuros was filled with abundant Catholic churches built during the 16th century, which includes the still present and standing San Agustin Church. Having a royal institution within an urban port city is also shared by the Southeast Asian region. Intramuros, Intramuros housed the Spaniards, the Ilustrados, and even the Americans that resided during the time of colonization, and among them are the highest ranking officials assigned by the king in the colony, particularly the Governor General. The Palacio del Gobernador was located along the General Luna Street southwest to Plaza Roma, and it functioned as the official residence and the office of both the Governor General and the Real Audiencia. Lastly, the urbanization pattern of having commercial areas is shared among Southeast Asian port cities. The thriving trade with the Chinese together with India has been described as a driving force that honed and enriches the sociocultural knowledge and lifestyle of Southeast Asia. Streets, ports, and other spaces for interaction and trade contribute to the exchange of culture, and its impact is reflected through history by the presence of Chinese communities in Binondo, Manila. Pueblo de Binondo is termed to be the most famous suburb, which developed into a large commercial district. Its main street, Calle Escolta, became a center of commerce that even affluent and dignified individuals visit. The socioeconomic stratification remains to be evident in the designation of commercial areas and the structure of every streets. As an example, the pavement of the main street, Calle Escolta, was described to be made of cobblestones and piedra Chinese blocks, while the market for commoners is in another street called Calle Rosario. And then Binondo also has their third street, Calle Fernando, which was occupied by mobile vendors and portable stores.
So the third and last part of our presentation will be focused on the Spanish influence in Intramuros brought by trade. As repeatedly mentioned a while ago, it was the galleon trade that paved the way for globalization by facilitating the economic movement and cultural interchange of financial systems between the continents of Asia, Europe, and America. The galleon trade is said to have brought significant changes on a more local scale even in Intramuros. The proliferation of galleon-related enterprise contributed to a wide range of social and cultural advancements in areas like perception, aesthetic appeal, and representations. On top of the material goods brought about by the galleon trade, the intangible cultural materials also made its way to the Philippine archipelago. Reyes, as previously cited in our study, explores and investigates the social and cultural consequences of international commerce on local settings. The findings state that cultures of consumerism were formed and reformed in port cities as well as in surrounding areas. Similarly, in the study that was carried out by Fisher, also makes use of commerce as a means of disseminating information, and it focuses not only on the transfer of material culture, but also on the transfer of technological know-how, artistic design, and conceptual ideas. As such, the article of Ledesma accounts how from 1565 until 1898, the people who lived in the Philippines took on many of the cultural characteristics that the Spaniards brought with them. These characteristics included features of the Spaniards' surname, clothing, food, and vocabulary. The trading that took place aboard the Manila galleons had a tremendous impact on the culture of colonial Manila, and it contributed to the formation of the very society that exists in the Philippines today, which was dependent on the revenue, the goods, and the services that were provided by the trading participants. From cuisines, architecture style, fashion trends, and cultural events such as fiestas and novenas, the enduring Spanish influence brought by trade can be observed at present. Considered a symbol of Spanish power, the Hispanic culture that still stands today in Intramuros offers a glimpse into the glorious colonial era. With 333 years of Spanish colonization, Intramuros left a significant mark on the Filipino heritage, one that can endure the challenges brought by time and change.
To conclude, this research established the relationship between the historical trade of Intramuros and its formation and culture through the synthesized image given by the data from an expansive range of literature. Intramuros, as a port city, has proved itself to be an entrepot of international trade, culture, and knowledge interchange. However, along with the flourishing state of life in the city during the 1570s to 1630s was the influx of production which gave opportunity to excessive consumption of the citizens. The lifestyle within the walls became lavish. Moreover, the increased volume of commerce has led to the expansion of Intramuros, and even though it is unfinished, it played a significant role in developing regional commerce. The urban elements shared by Southeast Asian port cities, such as the location or the nearness of it to a river or waterwork, the street system, the religious center, the royal institution has been found within the walled city. However, the indigenous settlements in some of the most successful commercial areas, such as in Binondo, reside outside the walls. These findings did not hinder the contribution of the two elements to the formation of the city and its culture. The segregation among Spaniards and the native communities through through building a wall led to changes in the structures of villages and streets, and the commercial areas that are mainly occupied by Chinese merchants thrived and gained traction among affluent citizens, and even helped in building livelihood to the people. Though beyond the walls, class stratification was still mirrored by the construction of the streets in Binondo and the type of vendors or the market that exists in such streets. Finally, the galleon trade had left the Philippines with more than just tangible goods from voyages and infrastructures, but also distinct cultural impact. The centuries of continuous interaction between both the foreign and local entities during transactions have formed and reformed the culture of consumerism. Commerce has also become a vessel of information, and the galleon trade remained integral to the formation of Filipino society, as the majority of the population of Intramuros participated and or were dependent on the goods, services, and revenue of the trading participants. That would be all. Thank you so much. Here are the references for our study.
Okay, so thank you, Eunice and Pat, for presenting your research to us. At this point, we'll now move to our panel discussion, but first, let me introduce our panel members. Starting with Mr. John Glenn Espino. He holds a bachelor's degree in history, magna cum laude, from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and currently he's working as a social science teacher at the Philippine Science High School Central Luzon campus. We also have Miss Kathleen Faye Lagasca. She holds a bachelor's degree in statistics from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She is currently an MA demography student at the UP Population Institute. Additionally, she is a part-time lecturer at the UP Manila Department of Social Sciences, handling courses in research and practicum. She is a student member of the Philippine Population Association, the Asian Population Association, and the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population. Her current research interests are fertility and family planning. We let us begin with Mr. Espino, and then we'll move over to Ms. Lagasca. Okay, so Glenn.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning,
Nakikita niyo ba?
sir.
Good morning. Ayun, first of all, congratulations sa presentation ng paper ninyo. And it's really interesting to understand the commercial historical pursuits ng trade relations doon sa Intramuros. Actually, ang interesting kasi yung Intramuros kasi is really a melting pot of diverse cultures ng iba't ibang foreign influences and of course yung mga natives. Meron lang akong question kasi 'di ba it was on 1815 when the galleon trade ceased. So tumigil siya ng 1815 eh. Pero ano ba yung parang tawag dito yung commercial development after ng galleon trade kasi from 1881 onwards nagkaroon ng widening of ports. Kasi one of the discussion talaga sa galleon trade is sobrang hirap talaga na i-maintain. Kasi unang-una, it will take 1 to 2 years para makarating doon, makapaglakbay. Alam niyo ni Sir Christian. So, natuwa lang ako kasi yung paper nyo is pointing out na isa yon sa pinaka nagbigay ng wealth sa Intramuros and sa city. So ano yung naging commercial development during that time after ng galleon trade? So, pero bago yan, nakakatuwa din, I guess isa din sa pwede yung pagtuunan din ng pansin is that you have to look on to other primary sources to have an in-depth discussion of your paper. Especially na yung Intramuros kasi or yung World City ay hindi lang talaga siya nakasandig sa influences ng mga Spaniards. One of our discussions from Dr. Luisa Ticamagay, there's a historical continuity ng iba't ibang mga influences, natives man yan, o ng Southeast Asian neighborhoods na nagko-continue doon sa trade culture ng Intramuros. So, for example, may mga contributions ang mga indigenous pagdating sa trade relations. In fact, ang daming suburbans na malapit doon sa Intramuros that led to the contributing factor doon sa mga street vendors. So I think you can look on to ano ba yung culture ng mga sa Intramuros, sino-sino nga ba yung mga vendors na dapat i-highlight natin doon. Yung mga sinamayera ba contributed doon sa textile production and textile businesses ng Intramuros, yung mga manggagatas ba, diba? If you're looking to the economic history ng Pilipinas, yung mga sigareras, ano pa ba? Yung mga karinderyas, especially kasi part yan ng indigenous and native contribution pagdating sa cultural formation ng Intramuros at ng Manila itself. So, all in all, maganda yung paper. I guess kailangan lang natin bigyan ng specific details, and especially yung paper nyo kasi is concentrated dun sa galleon trade. So yung galleon trade, sobrang hirap niyan hanapan ng primary sources. Especially, sobrang konti lang din ng mga Filipino historians who are focusing on that topic. I could suggest that if you really want to exhaust more of the details about the commercial activities, diba, sa Intramuros brought by the galleon trade, you can consult historians like Cristel Obispado kasi is sa mga parang nag-focus doon sa mga primary sources in Mexico. So you can ask them and other sources. Also, pwede kayong makakuha ng sources from Blair and Robertson. It might help. Diba? It might help. And Dr. Luisa Ticamagay, because Dr. Luisa Ticamagay was one of the professors talaga na nag-focus sa social history of Manila. And if you say social history of Manila, makita part yon is yung mga street vendors and mga maliit na business. And I guess if you can consult them, it could add to your research paper na mas well-detailed at mas na-exhaust yung iba pang mga information na pwede ilagay sa research paper natin. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you po. Thank you po. To answer po the question a while ago, yung commercial development po after the galleon trade. So, during the last semester po kasi we had the economic history of the Philippines, and it was mentioned po that the abolishment of the galleon trade, as you mentioned nga po, it was inefficient and unreliable as an economic activity. And in the years that followed, the reform of the galleon system weeded out the participation of pseudo traders, and if I remember correctly po, there was a new economic order from Governor General Vasco E. Vargas, and he laid out the general economic plan of the Philippines na mas instead po na magtuon ng attention sa galleon trade, mas in-encourage po yung agricultural activity, commerce and industry such as exportation po of raw materials, consumption of foreign goods, and yun po, yung of course palakasin po yung manufacturing industry ng Pilipinas. So yun po.
Okay. So thank you. Meron pa, sorry. Ang interesting kasi ng paper ninyo. Gusto ko lang din itanong kasi ano yung parang tangible or visible na na culture ng Intramuros that was brought by, for example, nasilip nyo ba, for example, yung clothing trend, ano yung specific clothing trend, yung continuity and yung changes development as the years go by doon sa sa Intramuros, ano yung development pagdating sa architecture, 'di ba, sa Intramuros, and ano yung confluences ng iba't ibang mga groups of people, Southeast Asian neighborhoods and mga indigenous people na nag-contribute dun sa city formation na yun.
I don't know the exact term po when it comes to the trend in fashion, pero we have a reference po. We have read a paper po regarding that, which was Reyes. Yun na-mention ko po kanina na flaunting it, how the galleon trade made Manila. So dun po sa paper na yun, pinaliwanag niya po yung fashion trends that came into the Philippines due to the galleon trade, and yung pagkakaroon po ng inclination ng mga tao to things that are lavish and sensual. So gusto po nila maipakita sa mga tao na wealthy po sila, ganyan. And when it comes to architecture style po, very tangible, very evident po, nakikita po natin siya. Though according po to Dr. Fernando Zialzita, yung ano po, architecture daw po sa Intramuros ay nagkaroon na po ng Filipino touch, kasi yung mga windows ay for ventilation, lalo na po sa tropical climate ng Philippines, and yung roof po ng houses ay mas tall, or parang can withstand na po yung mga heavy rain sa Intramuros, ay sa Philippines. Yun po.
Ayan. Yun lang naman yung one of the good points is that meron kayong discussion talaga sa trade, which is the backbone pagdating sa city formation ng Intramuros. I guess one of the things that might help also is you can consult Jhon and John Bowery pagdating sa sa pagde-describe nila sa Manila, kasi it might help na kung ano yung nakikita nila was also brought by the trade culture na nangyayari sa Intramuros. Pero all in all, your paper is good and thank you so much.
Thank you very much po, Sir Espino.
Thank you po, sir.
Okay, we'll now move over to Miss Kay.
Okay, so hi students, hello po panel members and Intramuros Administration. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes po, ma'am.
Okay, so first of all, congratulations on finishing a paper within a span of, let's say, 6 weeks. Since 6 weeks lang kayong naging intern ng IA, and I think this is the last week. So the topic itself is very interesting. So Sir Espino already has given comments on the content. So references that you could consult to deepen your understanding of the paper. So on my end, siguro I'll just give some comments to, let's say, improve the paper as a whole. This might be useful when you have your qualitative research next semester. And then I'll give siguro some questions or clarifications. So first, regarding the paper, so siguro the biggest comment that I could give is to do not downplay your own study. So parang meron kayo doon sa bandang nagdulo ng paper ninyo na very apologetic yung dating ninyo na, oh, ito lang yung meron sa amin, ito lang yung nagawa namin, ganyan, ganyan, ganyan. So do not downplay your own research. It already has merit. This is an explored topic. As of now, I think, hindi pa siya masyado na-explore. So that by itself, meron ng merit yung paper ninyo. Then I think, when you do write your own paper, I think there are instances that you do not have to mention the title of the book or the title of the journal. So, bakit hindi na natin siya ginagawa? Kasi yun na yung point ng in-text citation. So, let's say, Maningas 2014. So, Maningas 2014, pwede mo na lang tingnan sa references page. Unless the book itself is, let's say, a groundbreaking, like, let's say, topic or book reference. Then, review how to cite in APA. So, crucial to kapag nag-thesis din kayo next year. And then, a question siguro doon sa on the commercial trade. May nabanggit kayo na may isang study na noong 2014, interviewing, let's say, the vendors in Intramuros in Intramuros itself. So,
nagkaroon ba, let's say, ng changes before yung Hawkers Plaza from 2014? Then the 2019 na in-establish, I think, yung Hawkers Plaza, at least based on your own paper. Nagturo kasi ako sa Mapua circa 2019. So parang may mga parang hindi naman masyadong na-offset, I think, yung mga vendors. Like, at least doon sa walls ng Mapua, like yung mga merong spicy chicken and stuff, ganyan. May sarili talaga silang pwesto. And when you also go to the other places of Intramuros. So may changes ba from, let's say, yung na-report noong 2014 and in between noong 2019 na yung sa Hawkers Plaza? So yeah, I think that's the first question that I have.
I haven't been po to Intramuros lately. So, according po dun sa article po ni Almendral, and there was a study by the students po, I can't remember the school, but it was mentioned po that the Hawkers Plaza provided or mas naging legitimate po yung place for sa kanilang pagbebenta. And I believe the paper po that was conducted by the students, mas nag-focus po kasi sila sa sanitation. So mas na-ensure daw po yung sanitation, especially from the street vendors, if meron lang pong provided space such as the Hawkers Plaza for the street vendors. So yun po.
Okay, thank you. Then second question, dun sa significance of the study ninyo, I think you've mentioned a theoretical significance. So parang what the study contributes to the field. Do you see any quote-unquote practical significance of the study? Let's say something that IA could use, something let's say the Department of Tourism can use, referencing your own study.
Our study po provided contextual data on the impact of the economic history of Intramuros to the culture. And we think po na apart from contributing to the Southeast Asian regional studies, as what Sir Espino mentioned po, we could develop our paper and focus on the influence of the galleon trade to the natives and how it developed on the city. And by providing specific highlight on, for example, the street vendors, I think we could help providing insight to the local LGUs, and help contextualize their policies and on how to address the issues and formation po nung how to treat the communities in the city. Yun po.
Okay, so I think that's all. The other comments about proofreading and stuff, I'll just email it to you. Thank you, Sir Katahan.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay, so
Thank
thank
you
you very much, Ma'am Kay, Sir Glenn. And at this point, we are now opening the floor for questions from the audience. So you may use the Zoom Q&A button or comment via Facebook Live. So we already have two questions here. From an anonymous attendee, was the setting of Intramuros as a port city crucial for the historical development of the city of Manila or even the Philippines as a whole?
Hello po, thank you for the question. Dito po sa question na was the setting of the Intramuros as a port city crucial for the historical development of the city of Manila. I was able to watch po the talk of Dr. Gat Bonton, or it was a promotional video from the Intramuros Administration. And she mentioned po that there were comments that were saying that Intramuros should not be preserved because it is a colonial memory and it represents the failure of the Philippines. However, Dr. Gat Bonton mentioned that Intramuros is a microcosm of both good things and bad things, not just the failures of the Philippines under the Spanish colonization, but of course the achievements as well. And aside from being a symbol of, or being a colonial memory, Intramuros is a symbol of colonization and our spirit to rise above it. So to answer the question po, yung talk po ni Dr. Fernando Zialcita, during the ILS episode 4 po, yung title ay, or he mentioned po that beyond the Intramuros Hispanic character lies relevance which transcends centuries and regimes. So aside po from the task of conserving Intramuros, naniniwala po si Dr. Fernando Zialcita na Intramuros has played in building the Filipino nationhood. First off, specifically the galleon trade, it unified the archipelago. So before the galleon trade, there was no centralized economic system in the Philippines. But with the galleon trade po, it was centralized to the colonial capital. And another one that was cited po by, or that was mentioned po by Dr. Fernando Zialcita, Intramuros po, or that the development on the city of Manila created a culture that is globally connected yet original. So dun pa lamang po sa part na yun, masasabi natin na yung development ng Manila ay nakatulong sa pagkakakilanlan or sa identity natin as Filipinos today. So madami po siyang sinabing example regarding the culture. So na-mention ko na po yun kanina, which is yung architecture ng Philippines na nakatulong po. So yan.
Okay. So another question from Mr. John Paul Egalin Abellera. He says, "Good morning. I am curious about what happened to the trade in Intramuros during the British occupation."
To be honest, we did not look into what happened into the trade during the the British occupation. But from what I can remember, that was stated on the website of the Intramuros Administration. The British invasion of Manila was the first time that the Spanish power was driven out of its colonial city. So there was no specific information regarding the trade that happened during the British occupation. But if we can get back to the question, since we do not have the information right now, we can provide the answer for Mr. Abelara once we have it po. Thank you.
Okay, so next question from an anonymous attendee again. Now that you have established the importance of trade in the culture and city formation of Intramuros, what is the relevance of trade and commerce in Intramuros now?
Based po sa sagot ni Patricia kanina na makakatulong po yung aming study and of course yung pag-formulate po ng mga policies to help po sa trade and commerce ng Intramuros. And citing again the study of Almendral, small businesses daw po are the essence of and the backbone of the Philippine street life, whether that would be in Intramuros or anywhere else in the country. So trade now in Intramuros, aside from being a source of income and sustainable livelihood for vendors, trade in Intramuros has kept the streets of Intramuros alive. So I believe there was one study that in Morales Street, yun daw po yung street full of vendors and snack carts na nakakapag-attract sa mga students and nagiging source po siya ng location that can help or yung parang mag-gather, mag-share daw po yung mga tao ng kanilang mga stories. And yung isa pa pong significance ng trade today ay yung showcase po ng Intramuros Administration. I believe there was a pop-up booth which ended just last July 31. So dito po sa mga pop-up booth, ini-encourage po ng Intramuros Administration na mag-sell ng products coming from different provinces, and nasa-showcase din po dito yung culture ng Filipinos, which is very reflective of the importance of trade back then, na nakikita po natin yung culture na malayo sa Pilipinas. And ngayon naman po, mostly sinusupport na natin yung Filipino-made products and binibigyan natin ng chance yung mga sellers and visitors na makilala yung products nila as well as yung Intramuros. So yun po.
Sorry. Last 3 questions here. The first one is, how did the implementation of a street system during the Spanish colonization impact the way early Filipinos live and use their spaces?
So as we mentioned in the study, The implementation of a grid-like system in Intramuros was in accordance to the order of King Philip II to reorganize the early Filipino communities into bigger and concentrated villages. This major shift in settlement first and foremost impacted the livelihood of early Filipinos who are subsistence farmers and also rely on the waterworks for their trading. And one of the objectives of this reorganization is to make the integration of Hispanic culture easier. And yun, a work of Geraldez cited how natives engaged in the social contact with the Spaniards' culture through participating in church rituals and the theatric portrayal of during Holy Week and joining processions in the streets and other festivities during the village patron day, for example. But it is important to note that these social contact has did not just purely absorbed by the natives, but has been indigenized as well. Yun po.
So another question from anonymous attendee. Hello, you mentioned in your presentation a number of influences the trading had towards the cultural formation in Intramuros. I would just like to ask if these influences would be regarded as unique to the walled city, or is it something witnessed as well in other parts of the country?
Hello, to answer the question po, um, the cultural formation po na dinala ng trade ay hindi lang po limited sa Intramuros. So sa paper po namin, we mentioned po that or first po muna, Dr. Torres mentioned that Catholicism was brought daw po by the galleon trade. And he also mentioned that and from that, may mga novenas and fiestas na very lavish ang celebration, not just in Intramuros, but anywhere else in the country po. And yung another example po from Dr. Zialzita ay yung mga food. So, pagdating po sa mga products that were brought by the galleon trade, hindi lang po ito na limit sa walled city, kundi pati sa iba't ibang part ng Pilipinas. So, yung mga products such as cacao, chocolate beans, avocado. So, yun po.
To add din po sa naging response ni Eunice, yung theoretical foundation po nung research namin, which is presented by MacG, reports that the main regional port cities in the age of empire, such as Manila and other cities in Southeast Asia, were important to the development of urban primacy, and that includes development of trade and then modernization and industrialization of the country. And by discussing the urban elements po that are shared in within the region, not just in the Philippines, we could say na these impacts, the economic impacts may have some unique descriptions or characteristics, but is also at the same time shared with other Southeast Asian port cities po.
Okay, so there are still questions coming in, but I'm sorry we have to cut the Q&A portion to this last question here. So ito na yung last. It was mentioned earlier that Intramuros encapsulates the influence of the Spanish colonial power despite its restoration and incorporation of Filipino identity. Would you mind expounding on the Filipino identity in Intramuros?
So this question was actually brought up by our mentor, Sir Christian. So in our paper, we have cited or we have written there the enduring Spanish legacy of Intramuros. But Sir Christian mentioned that there are many point of views regarding this view that there is an enduring Spanish legacy in Intramuros. He cited one, which was Dr. Gatbonton, that despite being built in the Spanish colonial period, Intramuros is very Filipino today. So looking into that comment, I believe, ay, nawala po yung wait lang pa. restoration and incorporation of the Philippines. So I believe po that there was so we Filipinos have the tendency po to not just accept what was given to us. So yung mga influences po ay hinahaluan natin ng a touch of Filipino that would complement our culture. So one example, again, that was mentioned by the talk of Dr. Fernando. He mentioned po, for example, na yung mga food na dumadating sa Intramuros and the galleon trade, or from, in general po, from the Spanish colonial period, yung mga items gaya ng tableya, hinalo po to ng Filipino sa sticky rice, which resulted to the champorado. And yun po, yung mga large windows for ventilation sa houses, yun po yung mga touch or Filipino identity na makikita natin sa Intramuros today. And of course, yung folk Catholicism na broadly madescribe po as ethnic expression ng Catholicism or ng mga Pilipino sa pagpapractice ng Catholic. So kaya mas naging effective yung papahalap ng Catholicism sa Pilipinas because the Filipinos did not just accept it as it is, but hinaluan po ito ng way ng pagpapractice before. So yun naman po. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Pat and Eunice. Congratulations. So we'll now move to the next presentation. Our next presentation is entitled Light Within the Darkness, Dark Tourism in Intramuros, a study that aims to assess possible dark tourist sites in Intramuros using the dark tourism spectrum framework, and to explain the importance of dark tourism and its educational role. This will be presented to us by Micaela Portia Bartolome, an incoming senior student of BA Social Sciences major in Area Studies, whose interests are in the fields of medicine, behavioral sciences, and the humanities. And Gabriel Farrish Rojo, also an incoming senior student of BA Social Sciences major in Area Studies at the University of the Philippines, Manila. His current research interests are in the fields of psychology and sociology, and he was a university of scholar for the past 2 semesters, and he has been a consistent college scholar prior to that. So, Mika and Far, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sir Christian, for that wonderful introduction. To our panel members, Ms. Kathleen Faye Lagasca and Mr. Jhon Espino, and to Mr. Christian Katahan and Mr. Rancho Arcilia, guests, co-interns, and co-researchers, a pleasant day to all of you. So may I first share screen our presentation? Okay, so today we will be presenting our study entitled Light Within Darkness, Dark Tourism in Intramuros. To give us a brief background of study, I will give the floor to Ms. Portia now.
So Intramuros is known as the Walled City. So Intramuros, this is a historical site that both local and foreign tourists visit in the city of Manila. So the significance of the place in the Philippines history being the center of cultural and historical events that has transpired within the walls and especially during the dark times of occupation and the war. So it has seen the repression and oppressions of the Filipino and has story on colonialism, decolonizations, and formations of national identity. Apart from beauty of the district, Intramuros has likewise appealed to the people who enjoy the dark historical stories.
So, despite the beautiful image that the walled city depicts in the present, history tells us that it also has its own dark past, signifying that Intramuros was not safe from the events related to death and suffering. Thus, this opens the discussion for dark tourism to be recognized in Intramuros. Dark tourism, as defined by the pioneering scholars in the field, Lennon and Foley, defined it as the presentation and consumption of real and commodified death disaster sites. Furthermore, The authors considered it as a new and emerging phenomenon during the 1990s when there was a growing trend in tourists visiting sites associated with death and suffering that were featured in media outlets. For example, the 9/11 Ground Zero in New York, Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland, and the killing fields in Cambodia. And as the studies in the field of dark tourism had progressed, there had been attempts to redefine its concept. In the end, dark tourism became so broad that anything that is related to death and suffering, no matter how big or small it is, will be classified as belonging to it. Here were some of the new definitions formed by the scholars. So, for example, dark tourism is concerned with encountering spaces of death or calamity that have political or historical significance and continue to impact upon the living. Another one is dark tourism, visitations to places where tragedies or historically noteworthy death has occurred and that continue to impact our lives. The third one is dark tourism, the visitation to any site associated with death, disaster, tragedy in the 20th century for remembrance, education, or entertainment. Dark tourism is where the tourist experience is essentially composed of dark emotions such as pain, death, horror, or sadness, many of which result from the infliction of violence that are not usually associated with a voluntary entertainment experience. And the last one, dark tourism sites are diverse, thus providing a broad scope of distinctive consumer experiences with elements of culture, heritage, memorialization, commemoration, education, and entertainment. So furthermore, one study has compiled a list of dark tourism typologies. So as you can see here, the umbrella of dark tourism definition has really widened that it is not just about generally about death and suffering, but anything associated with it can be considered part of its scope. So for example, uh, grave tourism, war or battlefield tourism, Holocaust tourism, genocide tourism, prison tourism, communism tourism, Cold War and Iron Curtain tourism, and so on, can be classified as under dark tourism. So Intramuros, in different articles, as well as in many vlogs and videos, has been tagged as one of the famous dark tourist destinations here in the Philippines. However, Intramuros Administration, the agency that manages the walled city, does not promote any activities associated with dark tourism. Until now, there is still a gap in the inclusion of dark tourism in Intramuros, with it being vaguely classified as a mere spooky experience in media outlets, blogs, and social media platforms. Thus, this research this research study will aim to address the aforementioned present issues with dark tourism by answering the two main research problems. So the first one is, what are the possible dark tourist sites in Intramuros? And the second one is, what is the importance of dark tourism and why should it be promoted? So accordingly, here are the objectives of the study. The first one is to assess possible dark tourist sites in Intramuros with regards to the conceptual framework going to be used. And the second one is to argue the importance of dark tourism and its educational role in raising historical awareness, instilling moral values, and providing a different perspective or para understanding of the past.
For the methodology, so we determine the possible sites or buildings to be considered dark tourism sites within Intramuros. So we use case study that explore a phenomenon with a specific context and qualitative in nature. So we try to understand the possible of dark tourism phenomenon within Intramuros and argue for the significance. So for the data gathering, so documents analysis will utilize to examine the gruesome history of the selected site. So that includes tragic killing, death, suffering, and anything associated with the definition of dark tourism that was connected to the site. And also, um, we utilize documents analysis of past studies relating to the dark tourism. Next one. So scope and limitation. For scope and limitation, we will study exploring limited in exploring possible dark tourism sites within Intramuros that guided by the framework, and also argue for the importance of dark tourism that will serve as one of the base of the administration if they decided to promote it. And we will not discuss on how dark tourism should be incorporated within the framework of tourism promotion in Intramuros, which include devising a model or formulating a plan on how to promote and manage of dark tourism. And and we will not also focus on demand side, which assess the motivation of tourists going to Intramuros on the concept of dark tourism or going to dark tourism sites.
Okay. So for our conceptual framework, we will utilize the dark tourism spectrum made by Philip Stone. So in this framework, the concept of a spectrum considers various shades of darkness or a perceived degree of macabreness with a broader dark tourist site. Within a broader dark tourist site, one may be able to identify a site and categorize it. A site may be considered darker if it has a higher political and cultural influence, and it is a site of death and suffering by itself. Other parameters include if it is designed to be more educational, centered on a more historic connotation, authentic and location, and has a shorter time frame to the event. By that, it meant a more recent occurrence of the event on the site that evokes more empathy and remembrance from the people. Another one is the non-purposefulness of the site. So it means that when the site became a tourist attraction by accident and was not created for attracting tourists. And lastly, a lower tourism infrastructure. So that is concerned with the amenities put surrounding the site. So a considered lighter site would be the opposite of these parameters. So now we move on to the discussion of data, which includes our presentation of the dark tourist sites in Intramuros and the significance of dark tourism. So for our first possible dark tourist site, it is Fort Santiago. So Fort Santiago is a fortress built in 1571 by the Spanish conquistador Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. The establishment of the fort signified the occupation of the Spaniards in Manila, declaring the city as the empire's capital, serving as the main headquarters of the Spaniards and later the British, the Americans, and then the Japanese. What makes Fort Santiago dark is its history of death, suffering, and the horrors surrounding it today, which can be centered on three events. So first one is the alleged underground chambers, and the second one is it served as a garrison during the Japanese occupation, and then the paranormal encounters and sightings. So for the first one, Fort Santiago has its own dungeons located in Baluarte de Santa Barbara that was converted into a prison during the Spanish era. It claims to have drowned prisoners whenever the Pasig River was in a high tide, but according to Jose Torres, this was archaeologically impossible. However, this is different from the acclaimed flooding chamber that may be possible, as the Philippine Revolution leaders have talked about a certain tambor del diablo or devil's barrel during the revolution. And this may also be connected to the account of George Amos Miller, a writer during the American era, saying that when the Americans took over the fort, they found underground chambers that were filled with skeletons. So the author concluded that the underground passage served for unintentional executions so that the authorities would not have to conduct any public punishments. So for the second one, another dark event that happened in Fort Santiago, as we all know, was during the Japanese occupation, when it was used by the Kempei Tai, or the Japanese Military Police Corps, as a garrison. They made use of the dungeons as a place for the incarceration and torture of captured Filipino and American prisoners. So another one is that Fort Santiago has its own ghost stories and sightings being experienced within the site, with guards and tourists reported screams coming from the dungeons when the night falls, and that ghostly spirits have appeared before them. So in accordance with our collected data and the attributes of the dark tourism spectrum, we concluded that Fort Santiago has a higher political influence and is truly a site associated with death and suffering. It constitutes a more educational orientation and is history-centric. Its product orientation and location is authentic, and the site is non-purposeful as it was originally built way back during the Spanish era. However, the atrocious events mentioned happened a long time ago, hence it was considered having a longer time scale, and it consists of a higher tourism infrastructure. After the assessment, the researchers have concluded that the site can be classified between darkest and darker within the spectrum.
Sorry. For the second possible dark tourism is San Agustin Church. So next one. So during the Spanish colonizations in the Philippines, one of their agendas was to spread Catholicism in the country. Or so under the leadership of Augustinian order, has Augustine Church was built 4 centuries ago. So however, due to the disaster, it has to rebuild 3 times from bamboo and nipa to stone and brick. So making it the oldest stone church in the Philippines that located in the heart of Intramuros. So the church has witnessed many important events in history of the Philippines that occurred during the Spanish era due to its age and resistance to historical disasters in the country. So the Church of San Agustin became a concentration camp of Japanese troops. So the Church of San Agustin became a dark because of the fear, suffering felt and experienced by the residents and priests of Intramuros. So especially the women and the children of the captivity. So added to this, the fact that Church of San Agustin is also home to the grave and crypts of famous Filipino from Philippine society. Next part. So in keeping the characteristic of dark spectrum of tourism, the Church of San Agustin has a higher political influence and is a site of associations with death and suffering. So it is also developed a more educational orientation and centered on history. So it is product orientation and location are also authentic and site serves no purpose as its original built during the Spanish era and is considered the oldest church in the Philippines. So San Agustin Church can be classified as the darkest or darker within the spectrum. The next dark tourist spot is Museo de Intramuros or San Ignacio Church. So San Ignacio Church and Convent Complex was built by the Jewish and completed in 1889. So the second church of San Ignacio of the Jewish ordered the construct from the ruin of the Church of St. Anne and the foundation of the Mission House of Jews at the Iglesia de San Ignacio site. So in 1832, a fire broke with Ravans Ateneo to the ground, but the church and the mission house were spared. So in 1894, 19, in 1945, during the occupation of Japanese Imperial Army, the church and the mission house was burned and was converted by the Allied brokerage storage building into storage facilities. Next. So the Intramuros Administration has decided to reconstruct the ruins of San Ignacio Church and plan to turn the site into a electrical museum to display the 500 plus artifacts collected by the cultural organization from churches and places in Intramuros. So Museo Intramuros was open to the public in 2019, announced by the Intramuros Administration. So next in 19 next one. So in 1949, archaeological feature was discovered in a lot where the San Ignacio Church and Jewish Mission house used to stand. So a tunnel was discovered on said site, and the Filipino anthropologist Dr. Espiridion Arsenio Manuel went inside and said tunnel and explored. So the tunnel was made of red bricks from the floor, side, and arch ceiling was filled with the flood water. So two skeletal remains were found. So he believed the passage is pointing towards San Agustin Convent and Ateneo Municipal. So the fork would be lead to the Colegio de Santa Isabel basement. And lastly, the Intramuros Administration was formed in 1979. Next part. So, Intramuros Administration conducted the first archaeological excavation of the Iglesia de San Ignacio in 1989. So, its most significant discovery was crypt at the southwestern portion. So, they discovered 204 niches which inscription Resto de los Padres Hermanos Antiguos. So its name and dates were written in charcoal above the inscription. A concrete staircase which lead down to the crypt was also discovered. So another significant finding was the original foundation of the altar above the crypt. So since the underground tunnel below the Museo the Intramuros are not sites that is open to the public, researcher cannot classify within the spectrum. So, through it is important to note that the tunnel are still authentic locations that are associated with the death and possibility suffering. So, we include it as a possible dark tourist site should the Intramuros administration decided to explore the tunnel.
Okay, so now we move on to the second part of our discussion. So what is the importance of dark tourism and why should it be promoted? So first of all, let's have a brief discussion about death. The concept of death is primarily shunned in our society as it threatens our ontological security. As defined by Anthony Giddens, ontological security is the achievement of being mentally stable obtained from a practical consciousness of the meaningfulness of our everyday actions. Modern society attempts to combat this feeling of dread by bracketing out those issues, such as death, which might raise concerns for the social frameworks which contain human existence. So, in short, we can say that death is considered taboo. With the growing interest of tourists in sites associated with death comes anxiety and confusion about its morality. It has caught the attention of the media, questioning its ethical dimensions and the exploitations of the tragic history. This uncertainty of morality may be one of the reasons why local governing organizations, official tourism groups, and local communities infrequently embrace the designation of dark tourism. However, in spite of these dilemmas that dark tourism has to face, it is in fact a distinct type of tourism that should be worthy of being recognized in its own right. So, in the paper entitled Constructing the Moral Geographies of Educational Dark Tourism, the authors explored the role of dark tourism in educating young students and its associated moral geographies. So this was done during a field trip to one of the most famous sites for dark tourism, which is Auschwitz. The former concentration camp is now functioning as a space where people can be educated about the complex history of the atrocities that occurred in the past and also for memorialization. The findings of the authors can be summarized into 4 points. So the first one being dark tourism provides contextualization. So by going to the actual site, people were able to thoroughly understand and indirectly experience the events that had occurred within it. So the second one is that it affirms collective identities. So in a way, the painful events that happened in the past that the people today have witnessed can make their attitude and approach more humane to others. Thus, this may able to strengthen the feeling of connection within their community. So the third one is that it aids in the manifestation of moral values. So by being exposed to the atrocities of the past, people were instilled with a moral duty to make sure that the events of the past will not be repeated again. So the fourth one is that it allows opportunities for empathy and moral judgment. So it evokes a sense of caring for and caring about in order to willingly empathize with the victims. Cognitive and affective elements of historical empathy were also highlighted, in which they are able to construct multiple perspectives provided by the concrete information presented by the site, and allowed them to have a more intense emotional experience by knowing the story of the survivors. So, respectively, to conclude the paper, the authors quote that educational dark tourism can be effective for teaching complex and sensitive topics. The field trips to the dark sites can make learning more vivid, engaging, relevant, and meaningful for young people. Auschwitz, as an alternative teaching space, offered the students opportunities to strengthen their historical consciousness, emotional engagement, moral reflection, and personal transformation. So, the aforementioned paper tells us that dark tourism, despite its criticisms, is not being promoted for the sole reason of exploiting, commodifying, and trivializing death as portrayed by the media, and as well as being rebranded as a mere spooky experience. While death, suffering, violence, and anything that associates itself with dark tourism is a controversial issue and a threat to our ontological society security, it does not necessarily mean that it's entirely wrong to talk about it and should be avoided at all costs. So dark tourism in many ways can have a big impact in the different aspects of our lives. So another significance of the manifestations of dark tourism phenomenon is that we give justice to those who have tragically died through remembrance and commemoration. As, Mason and Vanity have noted, encounters with human suffering in heritage sites can enable reflection on the precarity of human life. While much literature has focused on dark or thanatourism, and for the victims reframed in such a manner that they return symbolically from their location in a place of violence. Through the connections and encounters that visitors make, the dead can also become grievable again and their lives worthy. So in the end, if the administration decides to embrace dark tourism, its framework should be more educational and should treat the sites as sacred in order for tourists to gain a sense of respect and empathy for those who have suffered while gaining a deeper understanding of the tragedies of the past.
For conclusion and recommendation, so we assess the possible dark possible yeah, ito ulit. The possible dark tourist spots in Intramuros using the dark tourism spectrum framework of Philip Stone. And and we found three possible sites that are associated with the definition of dark tourism with the framework, and these are Fort Santiago, San Agustin Church, and Museo de Intramuros. And we also classified Fort Santiago and San Agustin Church as situating between darkest and darker within the spectrum. And uh, uh, to argue for the importance of dark tourism suggesting its include and promotion. And for recommendation, uh, we recommend studying the demand side of dark tourism, which involve the motivation of tourism going to Intramuros and their perception about dark tourism. And may we also look into for the future researcher may also look into how dark tourism should be modified or enhanced to provide the public with a whole new experience, keeping the educational feature of the site as discussed in this paper.
So that would be all. Thank you. So here were the references that were mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation. So
Thank you, Far and Mika, for sharing your research with us. We will now open our floor again to our panelists, starting with Miss Lagasca this time, and then Mr. Espino. So, Miss Kay.
Okay, so hi students. Congratulations on finishing your research. So for this one, actually, I'm very interested in the topic. This is, I think, novel in a way. And then things like dark tourism is something that recently medyo interested ako, actually, after I read your paper. So my first question would be, what is the compatibility, I think, of promoting dark tourism with the Filipino culture? So, this is drawing from my experiences. Pero nung bata kasi kami, when we say about, medyo, ay, hindi siya, na-mention ni Far kanina, taboo ang pag-usapan yung mga deaths, ganyan, ganyan. Although I think medyo nag-evolve, quote-unquote, tayo. Though I don't think it's in a good way kasi parang Halloween. Nagkakaroon na ng fusion yung Western at saka yung Filipino culture na pinag-uusapan na yung Halloween. So, ayun. So, promoting dark tourism, how is it compatible with the Filipino culture? So, yun. Any of the two can answer.
I think po with the compatibility of incorporating dark tourism within the Filipino culture, siguro po mas maging objective yung approach po natin. So in a way, hindi po siya magkakaroon ng more subjective feelings. For example, yun nga po na that being considered taboo and parang rebranding po of that as a more of an entertainment thing rather than an focusing on its educative role as we have discussed in the paper. So yun po yung parang one of the loopholes or parang problems po na na fini-face po ng dark tourism nowadays na parang sinasabi po ng mga tao na parang bakit nyo pa pag-uusapan yung ay parang pinagkukunan ng pera in a way yung pagpakita ng mga ng mga dark tourist sites. So in a way, that could be changed to a more educational way of telling the stories of the past so that meron siya po ng mga benefits. For example, raising our historical consciousness, instilling moral values, and then for the benefit of for ourselves. Yun po.
Okay, sige. A follow-up to that. Will this help in, let's say, solidifying the Filipino identity? Kasi na-mention nyo kanina na parang one of the possible practical effects, practical significance of your studies. Let's say kapag may pupunta na mga students in Intramuros Administration, then you can like incorporate, let's say, yung dark tourism. However, how about those, let's say, in Visayas and Mindanao? So, saan ako nanggagaling? Kasi medyo regionalistic yung identity natin rather than a very solid, ito yung Filipino culture, very regionalistic tayo. So, yun. So, doon ako nanggagaling. So, how can this, I think, help dark tourism as a whole, regardless, let's say, in Intramuros Administration or let's say in the Philippines as a whole, how can this help in solidifying the Filipino identity?
Well, thank you very much po, Ma'am Lagasca, for that question. Well, it does not, we can focus more on the events that happened in the past. So, parang pag sinabi mo, di ba po, na parang, for example, Philippine history, parang everything that happened in the Philippines, parang it is rebranded as things that happened in the Philippines. So parang hindi siya regional in a way na parang classified lang siya sa to one region. It's still a part of our Philippine history. So by taking that into account, dark tourism can still be significant by looking more into the ano into its significance po, na for example it gives more it induces more empathy po. So parang hindi uh le so parang from person to person na lang po na connection. So parang you've realized that there were so many tragedies and in the past, and from that uh we may be able to learn something and assess and reassess our moral compass. So ganun po. So yun po.
Okay, so last question. How do you think dark tourism can help the fight against historical distortion and disinformation given the current societal context? Kasi as we know, one of the current societal problems that we're facing nowadays is hindi masyado na-value si history. I mean, I think that's apparent na nagkakaroon ng distortion. So how do you think can dark tourism help the fight against that? Given that ang pinanggagalingan natin ay may educational value and may moral compass value ang paggamit ng dark tourism.
Well, as discussed previously po, dark tourism can help us deepen our historical consciousness and awareness, and as well as allow us to have more perspectives of our understandings of the past. So parang hindi po malilimitahan ang perspective natin or perception natin sa isang lang pangyayari. Um, while yun nga po na parang dark tourism is kind of a taboo in a way, it can still help us learn more about our past by knowing more of the tragedies that happened during those times. So yun po.
Okay, sorry. Super last na pala ito. Just a
Apo, sige.
question that occurred to me. So do you think that, let's say, the tidbits about, let's say, the dark tourism. So halimbawa, nasa Intramuros tayo ngayon. So pupunta tayo sa isang site. Do you think that, let's say, those historical facts should be shared to the tourists regardless of their intent? Kasi may mga pumupunta ng, let's say, Intramuros for picture taking. So may mga yun yung point nila. Then meron pumupunta, let's say, for field trips, for more of educational reasons. So do you think that dark tourism should be promoted to all types of tourists regardless of their intent? And this will be my last question na for you. Thank you.
Well, I think yes po. Pero in a way, still the tourists will nasa tourist po yung parang yung parang kagustuhan nila kung gusto nila to know more about the informations regarding the history of the past. So nasa sa kanila na po yun. Pero the informations regarding those sites must be available there. So for example, sa Fort Santiago, yung mga sites po doon na associated with death and suffering, it may be possible in a way na ilagay ay available lang po doon yung information. May mga magto-tours po. So if should the tourists want to know more about the site, then then readily available lang po sa kanila. So yun po.
Okay, thank you very much for Sir Katahan. I'm done with my questions. And again, thank you, students, for answering.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we'll proceed to Sir Glenn Espino.
Hi, good morning ulit. So, una-una, congratulations sa presentation ng dalawang students na to. Pero meron kasing tumatak din na na question si Ma'am Lagasca na naiwan pa rin sa utak ko. Sabi niya kasi how could it help yung dark tourism doon sa tawag ito, pagtulong sa pagsangga ng historical distortion given na meron siyang educational goal. So, inisip ko, sabi ko, kailangan talaga siguro ng strong collaboration ng Department of Tourism and other educational sectors para i-carry out to. Given na ang Pilipinas talaga ay we are marred with historical distortion, historical amnesia. Kaya when I was reading the paper of the students, yung incorporation ng mga ganyang sites ay important talaga in tourism. That's my perspective. As a whole, kasi one way to preserve our historical memory ay iyan sa ganyang paraan. And our failure to preserve our memory or historical memory will lead to historical amnesia and historical distortion of historical truth. So pangalawa, I find your research din essential din kasi ang kasaysayan ay hindi lamang nakakulong sa mga kaaya-ayang pangyayari, kundi ito rin ay dapat nagtatalakay ng mga madilim na kahapon na meron tayo. So nakita ko doon, I really find it amazing na meron palang dark tourism. And may gusto lang ko isang clarification na masagot sana. Kasi in your objective, you keep on mentioning the importance of dark tourism and its educational role in raising historical awareness. Pero dito sa scope and limitation nyo, sinasabi nyo that this study will not discuss how dark tourism should be incorporated within the framework of tourism promotion in Intramuros. So parang paano kaya magkakaroon ng contribution yung paper na to? Kasi I really find it interesting if there is no such thing of there's no such thing regarding sa tourism promotion, particularly yung dark tourism.
Ayan po. So thank you very much po, Sir Espino. So we've mentioned po sa scope and limitation namin na wait lang po, sir. Okay po. So how dark tourism should be incorporated within the framework. So I believe what we have answered in our study is why dark tourism should be incorporated within the framework. So yung nung sinabi po namin na how dark tourism should be incorporated, it is more focused on the demand side. So parang sa demand side po, maglo-look into you will be looking more into the tourist itself. So parang ano yung mga motivations ng tourist sa pagpunta sa mga sites, what should the administration implement on the sites para to make it more engaging, vivid, appealing to tourists. So yun po. And to add lang po sa sinabi mo po, yes, this it is really important to know more of the tragedies of the past, since for example po yung nabasa ko po about sa Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was a concentration camp during Hitler's time. So now it is a site destination itself that is primarily focused on educating people about the atrocities of the past, making sure that it will never happen again. So yun po talaga yung one of the greatest importance ng dark tourism.
Yeah.
So yun lang po.
Actually, kasi yun talaga, isa yun parang sa one of my greatest agenda. Pero ang nagkakaroon tayo kasi ng ethical issues. Like for example, yung ibang mga tao is hindi comfortable pagdating sa ganyan. So I don't know how to resolve it. Lalo na, in your RL, ito yung second question ko. Sinabi niyo rin that yung commodification, yung issue ng commodification used to be the threat to the authenticity of the presentation of dark tourist sites. So parang how can we resolve this kaya? Since, for example, yung inclusion nyo ng mga ghost stories embedded doon sa mga dark tourist sites. ay pwede siya maging avenue for commodification. Pero kasi, isa rin din talaga sa objective ng tourism is to raise revenues. So parang how can we resolve this, yung mga ganitong issue, and at the same time hindi na underpower yung authenticity of the presentation ng mga dark tourist sites.
Thank you po, sir. So what I am thinking is how the administration should focus more on how they present the sites. So for example, di ba po sir, parang pag sabihin natin sa dark tourism, mas nagiging entertaining siya in a way pag pinapalakas ng nagmamanage sa kanya yung mga elements. So for example, yung lighting, yung mga other things that were located in the site. So for example, parang pinapalabas siya as something spooky or parang something scary. So doon po nagkakatalo yung commodification and authenticity ng isang site. So as we have discussed, the persons who manage the sites should focus on a more on a framework that is more educational. So parang for example, i-lessen yung mga elements na nag-i-induce ng parang it is more of an entertainment rather than educational thing. So yun po. And another thing po of raising revenues, well, should the Intramuros Administration incorporate dark tourism in the walled city, it is just another part of their promotions po. So in a way, it will not entirely affect how they raise revenues. Ganun. So
Okay.
yun po. Thank you.
Kasi well, tama naman yung point kasi baka maya yung presentation din ng mga dark tourist sites maging spooky. At then baka maya ang maging reception ng tao maging horror house na siya. So yun. Thank you so much. I really find your paper really interesting and I hope na ito ay makatulong din sa Intramuros Administration on how to promote and to resolve issue na meron sa nadidiscuss sa inyong sa inyong paper. Thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you po.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Glenn Espino. Now we will open again the floor for questions from the audience. So there are already 4 questions here. So the first one is from an anonymous attendee. Can you describe more of the tunnel that was discovered under the Museo de Intramuros?
So thank you for the question. So wala naman pong nabanggit about sa article na nabasa namin aside from ang mga nakita doon is femur, skull, and jawbone. So Manuel also estimate the tunnel to be 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. And yun lang po. And then yun. And our ceiling and entire for red bricks. Yun. Okay. Or may padadagdag ka pa?
Ay, no. Wala na.
Okay.
Wala
Thank you.
na. Yun lang po.
Okay, so there's another question from an anonymous attendee again. Is there a particular spot in Intramuros which you would recommend for a monument to be placed, one which can be used for the promotion of dark tourism?
Well, thank you for that question. Well, if there would be a particular spot, then since based on our data, siguro the best spot in Intramuros would be Fort Santiago, since marami talaga dun yung mga events that had happened, especially during the Japanese occupation. So yun po.
Okay, so another question, again from an anonymous attendee. With regards to dark tourism, would it be pragmatic to create signs and markers on those sites that inculcate empathy, especially since these events are tragic and horrible? Also, we Filipinos commemorate tragic events like Araw ng Kagitingan, Rizal Day, and Ninoy Aquino Day. Would this present a defeatist attitude on the part of Filipinos?
For the first question, thank you for that. For the first question, um, I think yes na dapat mag-create signs and markers since one of the importance of promoting dark tourism is for remembrance and commemoration as discussed in the paper. And then for the second one, I think it does not present a defeatist attitude. Rather, we are just remembering and as well as commemorating those who have tragically died in the past. So as we have mentioned as we have mentioned in the paper, na we give justice to those who have tragically died to remembrance, parang ganun. And that these connections and encounters that visitors make makes the dead grievable again and their lives worthy. So if we look at it that way, so it is not more of a defeatist attitude. So yun po.
Okay, next question. With regards to dark tourism, I joke. It's the same. Intramuros is a massive mass graves left and right. Due to World War II, decayed corpses are buried on the spot and they were buried where they died, including business and residential areas. So, how do you propose to introduce dark tourism without trivialism but still in keeping with the communitarian, bustling nature of Intramuros?
Okay, so as we have mentioned a while ago, na the purpose of dark tourism should not be focused more on entertainment. So for example, while talking about these kind of while talking about this information, for example, yung about sa tragic history ng Intramuros, um the administration should find a way na to keep to present these kinds of information to tourists without 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 compromising the fact na na it's for the sake of entertainment, ganon. So actually naisip po namin na during the paper na well, Intramuros can be said that it is a dark tourist site as a whole since nangyari po sa during the Japanese occupation. But of course, it will be problematic with the heritage tourism that Intramuros is currently promoting. So in a way, dapat yung pag-introduce ng dark tourism is more on a educational and educative way. Yung parang hindi siya maglilin through entertainment, and that in a way parang it will keep the nature of Intramuros na communitarian and bustling pa rin siya while still promoting dark tourism. So I hope I answered the question. Yun po.
Okay, thank you. There is a question here that is perhaps connected to the question about asking you to suggest a location for a monument. So the question is, what about the memorare or landmark commemorating the Battle of Manila?
Okay, so we have actually we have discussed in our paper na there is actually parang there are there are elements of dark tourism that is actually present now in um, in Intramuros. For example, yung memorare or landmark commemorating the Battle of Manila. So in a way, yes, it is it's it is it can be considered as a it is a monument for remembering those remembering the tragedies of the past. So yun po.
Okay, so last question from an anonymous attendee. Do you think dark tourism is an integral element in promoting the culture and history of Intramuros?
Okay, so Mika, do you have something to say before?
Yeah. Um, or
Okay, so ano po ulit yung question? So yes, as we have presented the importance of promoting dark tourism, which includes raising historical awareness. So in a way, by knowing the tragedies of the past, we are creating more perspectives of uh, of our learnings of our own history. So parang in a way nadadagdagan yung kaalaman natin, and that it helps in learning more of ourselves and understanding more of ourselves as Filipinos. So yun po.
Okay, so may isa pang question. It's a good question. So ito last. How do you suggest we ensure that patriotism or love for country and not hatred for those who cause atrocities in Intramuros will be instilled in the tourists?
I think since yung one of the things that we have discussed in the significance of dark tourism is that it allows opportunities for people to be more empathic. So parang by knowing more of the tragedies of the past, we are reminded na ay ganito pala yung nangyari, na parang there were so many sufferings. So parang in a way, it makes us more humane. We can reassess our moral values and how we think of our life and how we think of our lives, parang ganun. So I think it will not turn into hatred. Depende na lang kung ano, kung parang the administration or the people who manage it, parang yun yung parang pinapalabas nila or pinapakita nila sa tourist. But but if they try to pursue a more educational role in promoting these kind of dark tourist sites, then I think the emotions of the tourists will not result into hatred, but rather to a more empathic and patriotic way. So yun po. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Far and Mika. Congratulations. Can we have a photo op daw? So on ka muna lahat.
Hello po. Ako na lang po mag-take ng picture ulit. So,
Okay.
sige po. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay na po. Thank you po.
Thank you. Congratulations. So, okay. Okay, so that is all for today's Intern Talk, and thank you everyone for joining in our first Intern Talk for this year. Thank you, students, and thank you to our panel members, Mr. Espino and Ms. Lagasca, and thank you all for joining us. So there will be more to follow. So stay tuned for any announcement. And lastly, I'd like to promote our social media pages before we end. The Intramuros Administration is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So that's all for now. Thank you very much, everyone.